Hi, I'm Margie Holmes, psychologist, author, and educator. Today we continue our discussion on self-harm, but this time focusing on cutting. So what is cutting? Like other forms of self-injury, cutting is purposely injuring yourself by making scratches or cuts on your body with a sharp object that is enough to break the skin and make it bleed. Now, what are the reasons for cutting? Let's look at your experiences and share these with you, and you will quickly pick up what the reasons are. Anonymous one, I've been doing it for almost 5 years now. It started when I got in an abusive relationship. I was so depressed with the way my boyfriend was treating me that I began slashing my wrists. Then after that, I became the mistress of my coworker. I started doing it again when we broke up. In other words, Anonymous one, felt pain, rejection, frustration as she turned inward, either because she felt that the man was to blame and she couldn't deal with him because perhaps he was too powerful to attack directly. So, as Freud says, she did it to herself alone. Anger turned inwards. Anonymous 2 says, I was raped when I was living with my aunt and uncle. It was my first time to study in Manila, and my mom left me to her sister and her husband. One night, I remember sleeping on my bed, but waking up on his bed, and he was on top of me, hurting me. I fought, screamed, but he hit me till I blacked out. First, I tried to tell my aunt, but she was dead, ma. Then, I tried to tell my mom, but she wouldn't listen. I started cutting after that, and the blood would almost hypnotize me to go to sleep crying. I was hoping they'd notice the scars on my arms, but wala pa rin. Anonymous 2 and Angelina, whom you will hear about right after this, share practically the same reasons. Angelina says, I mutilated myself because physical pain took my mind off where the pain really was. I did it in my teens to get attention because I could not expose my abuser. I probably thought doing so may drive my family then to seek answers, to ask me what was going on. But it didn't happen. For Anonymous 2 and Angelina, I am so sorry about what happened to you. It was almost a literal cry for help, wasn't it, when you cut yourselves? Because you were hoping that your family, who are supposed to care for you enough so that they notice things that are harmful to you, and so that they ask you questions about what you're going through if you don't seem like you're doing okay, they in a very strong way, betrayed you, didn't they? Because either they didn't notice or pretended that they didn't notice, dead ma lang, because noticing would put them into a position that was too difficult. Your mom, where would you live if you wanted to study, etc., etc. So this is the practically literal explanation for cutting. The figurative explanation is you're trying to tell them, look, I am bleeding here, and you don't even notice a thing. You act as if nothing's happening. What's going on? Then we have Casey. Remember her from last week who used to use the syringes because they wouldn't show and yet you could drain a lot of blood? Anyway, Casey says, I first started to cut my wrists in high school. The morbid goth at that time, which was in me, thought it was interesting. My boyfriend at that time was emotionally and verbally abusing me. And whenever we fought, he'd call me things and names, and I'd actually believe him. I'd feel so bad about myself. Personally, there's some relief to cutting. When you feel bad about yourself so much, you feel so much hate, and it just seemed appropriate to hurt yourself, just like how sometimes you want to hurt other people who hurt you. Maybe looking at blood trickling down is therapeutic. I read somewhere that self-harm releases endorphins. I don't know if that's true though. Actually, Casey, I don't really know, but that's something good. I'll look it up and I'm sure the topic will come up in some other way and we can discuss it. Many cutters have shared how seeing the blood seems to soothe them. As a parent, one of the most important things you teach your children, or that you need to teach your children, is how to self-soothe, how to take care of yourself in a healthy way, because your mom and dad will not be there all the time. If you do not teach your children how to self-soothe, how to give them the self-esteem so that they know they have a capacity to self-soothe, what they will do is soothe themselves in unproductive ways, like cutting yourself. If you are so agitated that the only time you can self-soothe, for example, is masturbating, that is not a very good way to do it. Now, I have nothing against masturbating, as I'm sure all of you know. But if you masturbate not for pleasure or not even to go to sleep, which is the reason some people do it, then there's something a little wrong there. If you masturbate just to calm yourself, well, there are easier ways to do it. Deep breaths, medication, etc. Okay, Anonymous 4 shares his reasons for self-harm. I think that people who engage in self-harm are in a way cowards. They are cowards in the sense that this person is too scared to do the nastier deed, which is suicide. All he is desperate to have something to distract him, the self-cutter, from whatever pain that he is feeling. I think people who engage in this sort of behavior, which is self-cutting, have a physical representation of that pain. Physical pain is easier to deal with than emotional pain. What can I say except Anony 4, napakalupit mo naman. Frankly, I think it requires a certain courage to cut, though indubitably a quieter, longer-term way to understand where the pain is coming from would be dealing with it more maturely. But don't you think it's courageous to just find a temporary way to distract you from the pain because the pain is immense and yet does not kill you? And choosing to live rather than choosing suicide also takes a lot of courage, no? This may sound bad and judgmental, but in a way, I think I'm excused kasi judgmental ka rin naman sa mga cutters, hindi ba? That, I think it's easy to blame people and judge them if, as they say, you haven't walked in their shoes. Okay, another common but very important question that you asked us is, how do you prevent yourself from doing it again? How do you stop? For example, at Happy Hania said, I've done this before. How can I prevent myself from doing it again? At Liana Carla Joy, I'm an adult and I've been doing this for 4 years already. How do I stop? Well, let's share how some of you have stopped. Millie Gleason shares, I used to cut myself because I resented my mom so much. It gave me relief for some reason I don't understand. But cognitive behavioral therapy helped me a lot though. Whenever I got to catastrophic thinking, I reminded myself that it's not the end of the world. Just as an aside, catastrophic thinking is thinking just because you don't do something that you were meant to do, all catastrophes will happen. So if you didn't study, okay, you'll fail. But if you think, if I don't study, my boyfriend will leave me, it will be the end of the world, that is catastrophic thinking. And usually people who are depressed tend to think that way. So what happens is cognitive behavioral therapy shows you how your thinking can affect how you feel about yourself. It is not something objective, you see, like I didn't study for my exam, but it is something that you catastrophize, okay? Now, going back to Meili, she says, I'm not totally healed, right? And I'm still working on it, but it's easier to bear all that resentment towards my mom and other things. And I now know that I can ask for help when I need it. So life is good. Therefore, so far, the reasons given for trying to help yourself is immediate relief and the lowering of resentment. But Millie was smart for going to therapy. And I am so happy that she used CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a short-term kind of psychotherapy, because it shows that short-term psychotherapy works. So thank you very, very much, Millie, first for keeping on with your treatment and for giving us a clear example of how not medication, not tying you up so you can't cut yourself, etc., can actually help. Now, in addition to psychotherapy, the other mainstream therapy that can help is medication, especially antidepressants. Studies have shown that this is true. However, this is true for depression, okay? However, they have not come across, I at least have not come across any studies on cutting and medication. Now, why do I think, therefore, that cutting will be helped by medication? Well, because in a way, cutting is a symptom of obsessive compulsive behavior, okay? Because it's like you cannot stop yourself. Intellectually, you know that it's bad, but like the person said earlier, I've been doing it for 4 years. I've tried to stop and I can't. This is just like OCD. You harm yourself. For example, you keep on washing your hands until they're raw. You know it's bad, but how do you stop yourself? And medication has shown that it can stop OCD, obsessive compulsive people, from doing this, or 50% of obsessive compulsive people. So it's one hopes that medication can also stop 50% of those who do cutting, no? Because it's like OCD behavior, which we will talk about later. Now, another treatment option uses what is called neuroplasticity as its basis. Now, neuroplasticity is the belief that we can still change ourselves, we can still change our connections in our brain despite the fact that we're older. Okay, because before, what psychologists used to say is that you can only learn things, you can't teach a dog new tricks, etc., etc. And you can only learn things, really learn things when you're very young, till 7 years old, etc. But that is not what research has shown. Research has shown that even if you're older, you can still learn things, learn enough things that it will affect your brain connections, right? And this is even for therapy. Therapy, which teaches you a new way to live, also affects neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity means that our brain is plastic enough so it can change. And what we thought was permanent, like if you have a stroke because some brain connections have died and you cannot speak, therefore you cannot speak forever, this has been shown not to be true. If you constantly try to speak, in time there will be brain connections that will help you do it. Okay? Now, this will not be an easy and a short-term thing. It's a long-term thing. But for things that are worth it, keeping at it is certainly a very small price to pay. Now, let us go back to Casey, who actually used neuroplasticity to get over cutting. I quote what she said: "I still think about doing it sometimes, even now. Sometimes I'd go out and walk to the kitchen to get a knife." This is now when she has stopped cutting. "Or sometimes I'd look around for a blade. But then when I bring it to the bathroom, it's just not worth it anymore." That short walk/distraction is already enough to keep my mind off things and to calm me down. Then I just talk to my partner and to try to resolve things. Or if I still cannot calm down, if I'm still tempted to cut myself, what I do is I download some TV shows to help stop my brain from thinking. And that also works. Now, thank you very, very much, Casey, because in your own words and with your own experience, you have taught us how to deal with cutting in a neuroplastic way. When you say that just finding something to distract yourself from wanting to cut yourself, even just for a few minutes, is very, very good. Now, Casey continues, right? Casey continues about the situation that she's feeling, and she says, "For anyone who wants to stop cutting, I think other distractions also work, like TV shows or just sleeping. But it's best to try and resolve the problem by talking." So the first step is distraction, so that your brain makes connections that just because you want to cut, it doesn't mean you have to cut. Because if you do something else, it distracts you. Now, that is really a big deal. I hope you know how big a deal it is. No? In fact, I want to do another show on it, but I have to get your comments and I have to get your requests, okay? Therefore, when we talk, so that's yourself, right, Casey, how to deal with it. Now, for parents who have kids who you feel are self-cutting, I think just talking to your kids and trying to have an open line of communication works with them. This works with them not only if the kids are already harming themselves, but if they possibly might. And we aren't only talking about self-harm, we are talking about birth control or the use of non-birth control, taking drugs, etc., etc. You have to start with open communications. Parents cannot notice she's self-harming and then all of a sudden be so concerned. You know, I've heard kids say, ano, binubola mo ba ako? You know, all of a sudden you care what I'm doing because, you know, you've seen me self-harming. Casey ends. I guess I realize now that it really doesn't do anything, self-harm. Any good effect is so temporary and the bad effects stay longer and sometimes can even be permanent. Thank you, Casey, for your sharing your smarts with us. Thanks to all of you who continue to ask questions and share your experiences and voice out your concerns on whatever topic we choose for that week. Of course, we choose topics which are based on what you suggest. For example, next week we'll be talking about male sexuality. But please send me your questions as well as your suggestions for future episodes on either Facebook, tweet using the hashtag AskMargie, or send an email to askmargie@rappler.com. See you next week.